Like Archimedes, I could say, give me one swan neck flask like this one, and I could move the earth. Well, this is a sentence that the great scientist Louis Pasteur from the 19th century could have said. The reason why we are going to show you two films about the same episode called the spontaneous generation controversy, in which Louis Pasteur was engaged, is that there are two excellent documents about it. One of them is made by the BBC. It's a marvelous document in costume about the history of Pasteur. And the second one is a reenactment I did in 1999 of a lecture on spontaneous generation that Pasteur gave at the Sorbonne in 1864. You have now begun to read the scientific literature. You know how to ground the claims inside the text. You begin to follow the text. You know how to go from one reference to the next. You have become, in effect, scientometrician. But of course, you have noticed that when you arrive to a scientific text, there is not just text, there are documents. And those documents refer to what has happened through instrument in the laboratory. So we are now trying to cross the boundary between scientific literature and the laboratory. What do we find in the laboratory? We find experiment, that is, trials, which is, of course, the source of all the proofs, which are then articulated in the scientific literature and then discussed by the peers who read the text. And that's the reason why we can have robust proofs. Of course, it would be nice if we could take a very contemporary example. But to get you started, to familiarize yourself, I think it's better to take a very simple one. This one is very simple, but it's beautiful. Here, Pasteur answers a whole set of objections. He has an adversary called Archimède Félix Pouchet. And Félix Archimède Pouchet tells him that there is something like spontaneous generation. We are at a time when there is no asepsis, very little hygiene, and it's absolutely impossible to keep completely sterile a milieu from long. That is, if you leave a broth of chicken anywhere, remember, there is no fridge, nothing of the sort. Of course, no deep freezing. Everything that you leave in your kitchen will, after a few days, be completely rotten. What Pasteur begins to do with an instrument like this one is to control simultaneously two completely different things. One is complete sterility, and yet the possibility of sowing, of seeding at will when he wishes to do microbes and ferment. So that's the beginning of the science of bacteriology and, of course, hygiene. All of that for this little invention here. This example is very simple, but very beautiful. The whole idea is to answer the objection of Pouchet by saying, look, I leave the air coming here through the little hole here. So the air can circulate. If there is anything in the air which is carrying life in some sort, it will arrive here. Yet, as long as I keep this here, without modifying and moving the flask, I am perfectly able to put inside a completely sterile milieu. You give me a broth of chicken, and I will keep it indefinitely sterile. I boil it, it will remain sterile. Something which was said to be impossible at the time. But then, if I just do this gesture, then, after a few days, the broth will be completely opaque. Why? And you will see that in the film, because, as Pasteur said here, dust, the dust which is in the air, has been deposited. So when I do this, I move the liquid which is here in contact with the dust. So with very ingenious experiment, Pasteur managed to reconcile two completely impossible things. One is indefinite sterility, and those things have been here, look, for 25 years, not one single trace of life in it. Or, on the contrary, through a very simple move, production of new organisms. What can we learn from this? Well, a few essential things. First, Pasteur does an experiment that is an answer to an objection. And as you will see, when you learn to move into the laboratory practice, objection is the engine of a certainty of science. Second, he learned to control artificially inside his laboratory two things that were impossible before. Sterility, which is going to go through the asepsy and which is going to revolutionize medicine and surgery, and seeding or sowing ferment, and that's going to give the whole industry of bacteriology. So this is impossible without the innovation of such an artificial milieu. Third, by artificial, this doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's fake. It means it's because it's artificial, because it's a highly controlled artificial milieu, that the proof that Pasteur offers is so robust. Fourth and last point that you will recognize in many different experiments, it has to be dramatic. This is so dramatic that Pasteur gave a lecture at the Sorbonne, masses of people around. Is it dramatic because it's a fake experiment, because it's popular, because it's for the media? No, no, it's fake and dramatic. It's dramatic precisely because it's such a good scientific experiment. It's an experiment where everyone can understand what it means and why it's so efficient. And the result is complete conviction. No one disputed after that the spontaneous generation was dead.